want to have one clear segment on the update yesterday from Brian Cole's hearing on his preliminary hearing.
Yes.
You're a lawyer. You attended the hearing in its entirety. I've got a couple of questions on some intricacies that I'm not entirely certain I understand. Yesterday was the preliminary hearing. On the one hand, to determine probable cause or to go over the evidence they have in support of their affidavit for probable cause. And on the other hand, am I wrong in thinking it was also the hearing to determine whether or not Brian Cole Jr. stays in detention until his
Detention
trial?
hearing. Yeah, so originally, the entire thing is weird, to put it maximally diplomatically, which I normally don't do, but I'll leave it at that. So originally, it was supposed to be a detention hearing, which the government is going to give a reason on why he should be detained, and the defense is going to explain why he should be released under certain conditions, right? While they litigate this. So the first thing that the judge essentially said was that as of yesterday, the day before, so this would have been 2 days ago, but we'll just frame it as though we're in the courtroom. So I'm in the courtroom, and the judge says, as of yesterday late, we just found out that Brian Cole was indicted in the DC Circuit Court. Now, DC is the most unique district of the 94 federal districts, because you can prosecute someone for a crime, depending on the type of crime, both at the DC Circuit level, which would be equivalent-ish to a state court, but it's the district, or to indict them in the district court of the federal district, known as and then that would be prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Judge Janine Pirro's office. And she could do that both in federal, get a grand jury indictment, or at the circuit court. They opted to do so in the circuit court to essentially ride this. I mean, you could argue that they're doing this to ride out and achieve the statute of limitations. Later on, they can litigate this out and then free this guy. That's one argument. Another argument, a more good faith argument that I want to throw it out there and say this is the only reason why I would think that they would do that in the DC court. They wanted to secure a grand jury indictment at the earliest calendar time possible, and the venue that allowed for that between the two at the circuit level or the federal level was at the circuit level, because there was an opening to present this before a grand jury. And I think the next opportunity to maybe do so at the federal district level would be next week, I think, at the earliest, is what they discussed in the courtroom. So that's what's there. Here's the problem. The judge essentially comes out and says, well, Judge Boasberg ruled that the chief judge of the District of Columbia, Judge Boasberg, in a previous case, ruled that a DC Circuit Court grand jury indictment is to be considered as an indictment that can be then further addressed, right, at the DC District Court, Federal District Court. But he also stated that pending an appeal, which is it's right now on appeal, I think it was Boasberg that also said, while the appeal is going on, we have to wait and see whether or not that is considered a legitimate justiciable grand jury indictment in the federal district. So this could play out for a decade on whether or not they can even prosecute Brian Cole based on, and have a preliminary hearing even based on the DC Circuit indictment. That's still being litigated.
Look, I brought up Julie Kelly's.
Does that make sense?
It kind of makes sense. I guess I'm going to read
Very
Julie
procedural
Kelly's
issue.
Well, that's the thing, and I don't really necessarily understand the distinction. I'm not sure that I fully understand it, but I wanted to bring up Julie Kelly's tweet, which is on the screen now. I just want to read it because
the former food blogger.
Yeah, it does mean, look, she's not necessarily wrong about everything, and I say she's been right about some good stuff, but she writes, because I mean, look, and they'll call me a former Canadian lawyer. She's still able to understand things. She says, as I posted yesterday, the indictment against Cole Jr., alleged pipe bomb, was handed down by a grand jury in DC Superior Court local, not the district
Superior
federal court.
Court.
Yeah, so it happened a few times in DC federal grand juries made up of Trump haters repeatedly refused to sign indictments brought by Trump DOJ I don't know why that would be any different at the local level if that's the explanation. The magistrate judge currently presiding over the Cole case, he's also waiting until today to decide whether Cole should remain in jail pending trial, did not accept the Superior Court issued indictment during a hearing yesterday. This morning, Sharba, I want to know a bit about his politics, directed both DOJ and Cole's attorneys to file briefs explaining how pending hold issues by Judge Boasberg in a similar situation does or does not apply to the case. So that much I understand. As far as Julie's potential,
Yeah, so we're on the same sheet of music on there.
Yeah, so but where she says, sometimes they go to the district court, what was it, the local court, because they can't get a grand jury at the district level to sign off.
Yeah, there could have been political. I guess this is the only district where you can do this sort of shopping, if you will, right? Between the two, between the local court versus the federal district court.
Yes.
Are you catching that distinction? Is that understand?
Yes.
Or if not, I want to make sure that you understand it.
Okay. Well, DC is a district, not a state. We're talking a federal trial here, and then the question is, at the district level of the DC district, you have your local courts, which are nonetheless potentially merging with federal jurisdiction.
So there's an option to bring a criminal charge in either the local jurisdiction court or at the federal district court. There's an option, and you have to look at what the DC code says, and then match that in conjunction what federal statute, what jurisdiction can be had based on that. And that's why there could have been a political calculus based on what she just explained. I don't know the detailed nuances of who would potentially, what the magistrates are, what their affiliation is, but you could guess that the magistrates are all appointed by a Democrat administration, right? In essence, but I think I don't know the nuances of that. Let me just stop myself right there. I haven't looked into it, but there is that dual jurisdiction role, and then you choose whether or not you bring it in. Usually for petty crimes and misdemeanors, like for example, all of the trespass misdemeanors of what occurred for January 6th defendants, that should have been done by the DC Circuit Court, okay? Because those were misdemeanors. But whereas usually felonies and greater transgressions are brought before by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. So it would have been Judge Janine Pirro's office. But they would both be prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office because it is a federal district, right?
Yes, and that much I now understand. I guess the one question I had is, if the explanation is that you have an anti-Trump grand jury pool at the, I don't know, the higher level, why wouldn't you have one at the lower level? And explaining it away as a grand jury refusing to indict because they're anti-Trump, is there also a potential issue that
that's not an argument that I would subscribe to or believe, because you're dealing with the same jury pool.
Saying that's my issue. You're dealing with the same grand jury pool at the lower versus higher level, as far as I would imagine it, but I don't necessarily believe that I understand it
right, because both jury pools come from the registered voter pool of humans that reside in the District of Columbia.
Okay, good enough. And now the other question I had is it possible that any grand jury pool would be reluctant to indict because of the sheer weakness, in their view, of the evidence in the affidavit for probable cause?
Well, let me back up and explain. I think the real reason why it was done in the circuit court, absent any other information that I have, just based on my assessment of what happened yesterday, is that it was because they were able to secure an indictment. They could attempt a grand jury indictment in that superior court because it was docketed sooner. Okay. And that's why they attained it, because before that even occurred, it was just a charge sheet. And then based on that, they got the ability to arrest, right? For the arrest of Brian Cole. Now he's in detention. Now they were going to do a preliminary hearing, but the judge in the U.S. District Court ruled that we can't even have a preliminary hearing because we still have to resolve the issue on whether or not I can accept that grand jury indictment from the circuit court. So I would say that the U.S. Attorney's Office should then put forth a grand jury indictment. I don't know if you can do it in addition to, but we'll see. Next week, when that is actually in place in the district court, the federal district court. Additionally, I mean, go ahead, because there's a lot to unpackage.
Well, that's
procedurally. But that was the intent of the defense to do a preliminary hearing. But with the new circumstances that was introduced only at the detention hearing yesterday, the judge said, we're not going to address the preliminary hearing. We're only going to address the detention. And this is where it gets even weirder. So
Okay, well, no,
please.
so just we can all bear in mind he is detained currently pending the resolution of this particular issue, and so
Unless the judge ruled today to release him.
well, that's what I'm updating in the backdrop to see because the judge
Yeah,
was
because you got to
had
look.
reserved.
I don't know.
Well, that's from what I understood yesterday. The conclusion was that he was reserving his judgment until today because
Correct.
one way or another, you could release him and have all these charges continue, notwithstanding it. Okay, so now get into what happened yesterday. So this is this is open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
Who was in the courtroom?
Who was in the courtroom was the Jocelyn Ballantyne, along with her co-counsel. I have to look at. I need to look his name up. I have it somewhere in my notes. I can take a look at it, but I don't want to spend too much time looking it up.
That.
But Jocelyn Ballantyne, the lead prosecutor in this case, when I jumped in, you started to talk about her, how she was the one behind the persecution of General Flynn and the persecution of the Proud Boys, literally carrying the water for Nancy Pelosi's, Fedsurrection cover-up. Okay. And I happen to have an opportunity to ask her some questions after this hearing. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now and play that clip, or if you want
I played that intro with you walking on the street as the intro clip for this show.
Okay. So we've already addressed that then.
Oh yeah, well, and say whether or not she was the lead prosecutor in the Michael Flynn persecution, she was involved in it. She
was
extorted,
involved, right.
She extorted, because I want to weigh our words here. You see the way they're eviscerating Nick Shirley for any micro mistake he may have made. She was one of the attorneys in that case, persecution, where they extorted a guilty plea from Michael Flynn under the threat of going after his kids.
Right, and she could have I gave her an opportunity to correct herself as we were walking and talking. She failed to. So
no, they can't comment on ongoing investigations. Bada bing, bada boom. I'm joking.
Well, that wasn't an ongoing.
No, I know that's the joke
to rebut.
But so then she was in fact the lead prosecutor in the Proud Boys Enrique Tarrio case, where
you covered that very well when you had Enrique on the show.
So we all know about that. She's somehow in this file, Ivan. She's somehow still employed, and Janine Pirro picked her. Look, I've been in mind
that Cara Castronova a couple weeks ago asked the president. Remember when this came out? Cara Castronova, who was the lead White House correspondent for Mike Lindell, she asked the president, and I don't know if we can find that and post that up. It's actually underneath I put it as a subtweet to the one where you played, where I confronted Jocelyn Ballantyne. But in that, at the very beginning, she asks what are you going to do, Mr. President? You still have deep state that is essentially involved in the prosecution of this J5 pipe bomber that was the lead prosecutor in the Proud Boys case. And he said, we'll look into that. Well, I'm providing the answer sheet. So are you. So what more needs to be looked at on this matter? I think Judge Janine needs to make the determination if she wants to retain somebody that has zero credibility amidst the entire United States court of public opinion on whether or not she's going to be able to pursue truthful justice, unbiased in this particular case. Because she has a vested interest in having a patsy. She has a vested interest in continuing and perpetuating the insurrection narrative, as opposed to full exposure of the Fedsurrection. So she's not the right person for that job, in my opinion.
I've played the clip before. If I can find it quickly, I'll play it again. But yes, it was the journalist at Lindell TV saying, how is this woman still employed? And the prosecutor,
yes.
Does Janine Pirro not know who it is? Like, some people are hypothesizing everybody loves the bad cop because they can use the bad cop for their own nefarious purposes. And Jocelyn Ballantyne might be the bad cop that they can use as a crooked prosecutor to extort, coerce, whatever, get a 4-hour interrogation of a kid who's autistic, signed off on his Miranda rights
with no lawyer.
So she might be the useful demon that they can use here. But I mean, Trump gave no good answer to that. He said, I'll look into it. And here we are. She's still there. And they have this kid, 30 years old, autistic, currently detained pending the resolution of all of these issues. She gave you the cold shoulder. We saw that. Go ahead.
So to continue on with your question of who was in the courtroom. So we talked about her, another person, when you talk about autism. So I was sitting in the back row, and the person sitting in front of me, who during the recess, when he went to chamber to make a deliberation, on whether or not he was going to release or not, make a decision. An individual was sitting in front of me who had said that they had been working for Brian Cole Sr. for over 2 decades. And then when I asked him in a very neutral tone, I said, "Well, what do you think's going on? What's your take on this?" And he said that, I've worked for him for 20 years, and this kid, Brian Cole Jr., is autistic. And I said, what does that mean to you? I'm not very familiar with the range of what autism is, if you don't mind. He said, well, he's kind of like a 15-year-old kid up here. And so if you're a 30-year-old man with the 15-year-old brain, which depending on how developed it is, I mean, I got a 15-year-old here sitting across from me, and on one side, you could argue that autistic 15-year-old kid is not in a position to pre-plan a year and a half in advance as a precog, if you will, that he is going to be angry about the results of an election that's going to occur the next year. And for that reason, that's the motive that he's using a year prior to even knowing the results of the election to start building and purchasing items to build this supposed alleged pipe bomb. I mean, it's just
It defies any form of logic. And now, by the way, Ivan, I don't know if you have any if they went into this at all yesterday. I was having a fight with
and
someone.
his family was there. There was about 15 people from his family that were present. Also,
It's a known Democrat family. The motion or the brief in support of preliminary detention argues that he broke away from his family politically. He didn't like to talk about politics, and his family was Democrats, and he was upset about the 2020 election, and so he kept it quiet until he decided to assemble a bomb from parts that he bought upwards of 2 years earlier.
yeah, one of the locations was at the Micro Center, which is up the street. I happened to go there to purchase gifts for my kids, and I said, you know what, let me do a little quick video, and I posted that. And part of that, I actually interacted with the management to ask them, if we were to take for truth the FBI's charging sheet that they have evidence of Brian Cole Jr. purchasing the 9-volt battery connectors. First, I went to see in the aisle whether or not that item is sold, which it was. So that FBI gets a point there that it's plausible that an items of that nature would be sold there, at least 5 years later anyway. I took a little video to show that that's the case. I want to be fair and honest, right? And then I also asked them how long do you keep your video records of the CCTV footage at your facility? And they said, we didn't know for sure. I mean, a few months maybe. So I guess 5 years later, when the Dan Bongino savior, right, guides this new team to start investigating, I doubt that information was captured then via CCTV footage to prove that Brian Cole Jr. was the one that purchased it, particularly in the instance that it was purchased with cash. And they said to me, the management team over at Micro Center said that it's plausible that he purchased it with cash, but then put his account number in or phone number to associate himself with the purchase. Mm-hmm. It still doesn't mean that it was Brian Cole Jr. that purchased it. Similar to if I have a device, right, and the device is located near the pipe bomb location or at the Micro Center, it doesn't mean that I'm the guy that's associated with the device. It could be my device, but someone else could have been carrying it. So these are some of the nuances that need to be played out.
Well, before we even get into all of that evidence stuff, because I'm going to ask you a question about the sulfur, which was my own digging this morning. So you get in, they don't even get into the evidentiary hearing, the probable cause, because they're still determining jurisdiction for the purposes of adjudicating on the release pending trial.
Yeah, this is amateur hour to the tune of what they did with James Comey, to the tune of what they did with Letitia James, which were both dismissed, right?
All right. So how long did the hearing last?
Oh, it actually lasted a few hours as they were going back and forth. And so the detention hearing part. Well, let me finish with making sure that we got everybody that was in the courtroom. Robert Guvia, who's he's a content creator.
Oh yeah, no, I know he's a lawyer. I mean, he's from Arizona. He's a great guy. Was he there?
He was actually in the courtroom. So I saw him in line. I said, "Hey, Robert, what's going on, man? It's good to see you."
That's amazing.
And he said that he's going to be spending more time in DC and maybe even moving here. I might be breaking that, whatever. And so it's good to know that somebody else is going to be full time because that's his shtick, right? So I'm glad somebody's going to be dedicated that's on the Patriot side just to expose what's going on. And he was there, and he did a broadcast outside of the courthouse afterwards. While
Amazing.
he was there, while I was asking questions of Jocelyn on the other side of the courthouse, but he was there, and you had quite a bit of media. Washington Compost reporter was there. Some people pronounce Washington Post, and yeah, pretty much the family was in the first, second, third. Majority of the left side of the courtroom in the back there, and then on the right side it was probably staff. And I noticed that I'll have to take a look and see. There
What
was
was it?
another, what appeared to be another judge.
But what's Brian Cole's demeanor like? Like I've got pretty immediate life experience with people with autism, and depending on the spectrum, there's nonverbal to verbal,
Mhm.
highly functional, but it's obvious, like it's clear. But when you're looking at him, is he saying anything? Is he like sort of repeating motion, body
No,
movements,
so
or is he?
my vantage point, I had a very bad vantage point, so I had to kind of arch and take a look and see because I was all the way in the back. I wanted to monitor who else was in the room to assess the situation. I didn't, I couldn't assess anything either way. He was just sitting there quietly.
Okay.
Now, a couple things. I'm glad you reminded me of this, but his father, so his father, his mother, and his grandmother were part of that crew there, and the grandmother is going to be important as we kind of go into the hearing details. So the father, for the first part of the hearing, didn't have a mask on, was just sitting there nice and calm and quietly. But then as the hearing continued, after we went into break, after the break, he put a mask on. And to my assessment is as why are you putting a mask on? You don't want other people to recognize you, even though in that courthouse you can't take pictures, you can't do audio, video, whatever recording. So I think there's something there, coupled with on numerous occasions, I think two or three occasions, defense attorney stressed that it was not a conspiracy. It was just that the government was alleging that Brian Cole
This
was
the,
involved in the pipe bomb.
Ivan, I'm
So
gonna
you get where I'm getting at here,
well,
right?
I'm going to interrupt you right there and just say, like, I've been having a bit of a back and forth with Shipwrecked Crew and Harmeet Dillon, who is replying to
Yes, I
sass
saw
from
that.
Kyle Seraphin, but not replying to the substance of my questions, where she was on with
Yeah, you said don't reply to the sassy one,
you reply to my
Kyle.
questions. Because she was on with the Charlie Kirk show, and she's talking about how anybody panicking about the statute of limitations is panicking. In RICO cases, and I'm quoting her roughly, and I believe an argument can be made here. In RICO cases, the statute of limitations is sort of rolling because of the ongoing conspiracy. And I'm like,
I,
but we were told that Brian Cole acted alone. So if that's true, and this fails for whatever the reason, there's no RICO to go after anybody else involved in January
right,
6th or any other crimes.
valid point. I agree. And then also another valid point made a couple days ago by when this all started with Harmeet, with Tom Renz. Are you familiar with Tom Renz?
Not thoroughly, but
I
overview.
recommend having him on if you can. He probably is the first person that actually broke the details of Susie Wiles and everything that we've been discussing over this last year. He exposed that and broke it in June, mid 2024, way early
Mhm.
for anybody else. And then before that, it would have been Noel Frisch back years before that. So going back to the what Tom Renz basically said, he said that his interpretation of what Harmeet Dillon said was that they're not going to go after and they're going to do nothing before January 6th.
Well, they were asking, their original verbal request apparently was to postpone the preliminary hearing until January 7th. And I'm like, oh, the day after the statute of limitations, barring some sort of RICO charge. And if it fails, because they might not even get past probable cause on this, well, effectively, it has lapsed unless there's RICO, which they're saying there isn't in the case of the pipe bomb.
Right. So they're saying it's not a conspiracy. And so it doesn't loop in, right? It doesn't extend until the statute of limitations. And then on the other side, through this procedural maneuvering, there's not even going to be a preliminary hearing until after January 6th. So then the defense is going to argue, and then maybe even the government's going to enable that because Jocelyn Ballantyne's in place. Possibly, they're just going to say, "Oh, statute of limitations is run. We can get them for I don't know. Maximum we can get them for is littering with inert stuff." littering at the back of the RNC and DNC.
Yeah. Okay. So, a question about the family.
Yeah.
They haven't seen him in a while. He's autistic. Admittedly, the degree is maybe up for dispute, but he's been
Mhm.
in detention. He's had some sort of medical assessment. He doesn't do well apparently without his headphones, without his gaming. What's his mother like? Is she distraught in tears, or are they protesting his innocence vocally?
No, so they were there with like 3 or 4 rows ahead of me. The immediate family, the mother and the father were off to the left in the second row, I believe. And I felt that at the beginning it was emotional when he walked into the courtroom and then they did the all rise for the judge. You could sense a nonverbal kind of sighs or sounds that were emotional. Other than that,
Okay.
I can't tell you either way of how to interpret that.
Okay.
The one thing that stuck out was, why are you putting a mask on halfway through the hearing? Are you trying to hide your face from exposure
Yeah.
from folks like myself and others from identifying who you are? I mean, it's like
I
it's pretty
I
evidently clear. You're sitting by the mother who had to stand up when the defense counsel, when they started talking about the potential release of Brian Cole Jr. to his grandmother. And I don't know if you want to talk about that yet right now, but that's the meat and potatoes of what was discussed. It was arguing why to keep him in detention, and on the prosecution side, and on the defense side, whether or not to release him into third party custody, meaning the grandmother. And then the grandmother was brought up
Okay, so
and
let me ask you this
and
actually.
was effectively cross-examined on her understanding of what that would mean if the judge decided whether or
To
not to release him to
Okay,
her.
good. That is the important part. So they go back and forth on some procedural issues. Parents don't really get that much involved. And so the judge floats the idea of releasing Brian Cole Jr. in the interim, like they should under any Eighth Amendment
Right.
compliant constitutional. Although I know we might disagree on whether or not he actually poses a substantial risk to be released, but maybe
Well,
we don't.
those were the details of the discussion by both parties. Is he a substantial risk? So Jocelyn Ballantyne didn't really speak. It was her co-counsel, who we'll find out what the name is. He did the entire brief.
Let me just ask you though, why on earth would they have to release him to his grandmother and not his parents? What's the argument in favor of that
Yeah,
to begin with?
exactly my point. It wasn't really addressed. I thought to myself, as soon as they said, "Well, we want to release him," well, first off, they wanted to put some restrictions on him, so they acquiesced that we will keep an eye on him through there's video surveillance outside of the home of the grandma, and then also you had
Ankle monitor. I mean, the
ankle
kid,
monitor,
the
GPS, things like that.
the kid, from what I understood, even back in the day, didn't do anything other than walk his chihuahua, go to the 7-Eleven to get a pizza and 2 Cokes, and come back. I mean, so disable his credit card, put an ankle monitor on. He's going to live the same life he was living for the last 5 years and for the last 10 years.
Right. That's effectively the argument that was made by his defense counsel.
Yeah, and he poses a risk. When I read their brief in support of pretrial detention, and they say he's going to go finish off his work, like carry out his frustrations on the world if we release him.
Well,
He's been out there.
the government argued that, even after January 6th, he was accumulating more pipe bomb making material. Okay. So let's pause there real quick. So
I just, someone in the chat said he sounds pretty dangerous. I'm fairly certain that was sarcasm. I brought the wrong chat up. No, the dude, it's okay. Sorry.
I'm not sure if he's dangerous to others, but I think he is in danger of being Epstein if he's released.
Well, I mean, but he's in danger of being Epstein if they keep him there. They don't have a very good custody rate for a high value federal defendants or witnesses.
I think the risk is higher if he's out there in public, because then he's in the position to potentially communicate about the other co-conspirators, if there are any, accidentally. And so those other co-conspirators could potentially want to have him Epstein himself.
Let me ask you this now. That makes a little sense, because now
Just analysis, right?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because it sort of pieces together why on earth they would even float living with his grandma. I don't think people know where his grandmother. Do people know where his grandmother lives? And I'm not asking for
And
doxing.
that begs the judge said, no, don't tell us your full address because this is an open court. But her grandmother lives in a gated community in Gainesville, Virginia. It's about 30 miles west, about a half hour west, depending, with no traffic, 40 minutes west of DC. And then Woodbridge, Virginia is where the father and mother live, which is where they're where he was at, right? Living. So it begs the question. This is what we have to think through is why wouldn't he be released back to his original home where he lives? I mean, what are some things that come to mind? You made me think of something that maybe the co-conspirators don't want their co-conspirator back in the home of
Well,
co-conspiracy.
well, he's definitely
Possibly.
easier to find because everybody knows where that house is right now. I'm surprised to some extent that what was the case with the guy who stabbed Austin Metcalf? It doesn't matter what his name was. Um, but the family moved, got a new house behind a gated community. That
Yeah, so
address will
the
be tough
grandma
for.
is in the gated community, whereas the mother and father are not. So that's
How
one
how
aspect.
how old's the grandmother?
I don't know what the age is.
Like I'm
Add
thinking, like
20
my
plus years to the mom,
yeah,
maybe,
well, that's what I'm
or
thinking. But like
less.
my grandmother back when she was much older, but I don't think that she would have been able to keep me on a leash if she had to.
Well, that was the
Uh,
point that the government was making, and it made a very effective point that what the grandma is going to keep an eye on his Reddit communications. She's going to keep an eye on his YouTube and all this other stuff. But on the rebuttal, it was he was mostly a consumer of content, not a creator of content and radicalizing others and creating
Well, I mean, the rebuttal
threats.
in my view would have been the mother or father will go stay with the grandmother. They just need him in a place that's not the location that everybody already knows. That being said, we know
Fair
that
point.
everybody in that neighborhood has Ring cameras anyhow. It would be tough. The guy would have his routine, and they're not shy to put people on house arrest, or at least like even with some of the Jan Sixers, confine them to certain zones. Okay, so
Hmm.
they have their argument. Grandmother gets up and they're asking her questions without getting into too much detail. What was she like, and what sort of questions were they asking her?
She said, "Well, the judge asked her, do you know what your role and responsibility is as a guardian for?" I can't remember the exact term that they used for Brian Cole because he's autistic, right?
Mhm.
And she tried to answer that, and he said, "Well, basically, you're an arm of the court. So if you see anything nefarious, etc., you have to call the court and report on him, and then that puts him in a position where he has to be confined. Are you in a position to do so for a grandchild?" And the judge basically said that I don't know if I'd be able to do that, but she said yeah she could do that. But the key points I think that were made during that exchange is that one is the question of why the third party grandma as opposed to the parents. That raises a lot of kind of eyebrows for me. But you made a good point that you want them in a location that's not already essentially burned
Yeah.
to the public. So it's a safety issue. Okay, it makes sense. That's a good point. And then the other aspect is she's not going to be in a position to keep an eye on his digital activity, right? And there's also, she mentioned in the interaction, they asked, is there a weapon in the household? Well, funny thing is that the FBI, when they arrested this guy, they only went after his bomb making material, but they left uh, the gun or guns in Brian Cole Jr.'s name at the residence. Viva. I mean, are you serious?
Well, now I guess this is going to be the segue into the FBI DOJ investigation charges and the evidence. I didn't. This is the first time I'm hearing this. He had his own firearms registered in his own name. It's not like he had access to his dad's
Yes,
firearms
at his parents' residence. That's what I heard in the. Well, I'll have to go back to
in,
the
in
transcript, but yeah,
court.
that's what I heard in court.
Okay, so that is not something that I would have even known until yesterday, even if true. So he
Right.
has firearms. Did they mention how many and what type?
No, they did
Okay.
not. And then it kind of stemmed from when it was asked of the grandma if there was any firearms uh, in her property, and she said that her husband had one, and so they asked, "Would you be willing to, I don't know, relinquish or not have it at the home while Brian Cole Jr. was there?" And as that was being discussed, and they introduced the that he had registered firearms that the FBI didn't touch. So how
Okay.
much of a threat can he be? I
It's
mean, I don't know where it's ridiculous. It's
no, no,
so
people
ridiculous.
people think like they call you names and say like you're, I don't know, a doomer, or you're somehow anti. I was never anti anyone in the in the new FBI, nor am I now.
I'm
But
anti-incompetence
well, I mean
and
that's
I'm
you can't
anti-treason.
expect people to swallow what is fundamentally undigestible. So they have this hearing. I was reading through the preliminary motion, and one thing that I was shocked about is they seized everything. They found the pipes, they found bags with receipts, yada yada, and there's no mention in the motion or the brief for preliminary hearing about actually finding the black powder that he actually allegedly made, because he threw it out. He
Yeah,
threw
and
that
that's
out.
another point that the defense made, is that this was the experts that were used by the defense stated that this was not even a dangerous.
Oh, where did he go? They got him. Oh, jeez. I was Ivan. The joke will never get old. He might have had a battery issue. Let me bring up. Um,
Oh, wait,
oh, you got to reconnect to your good mic again.
am I? Oh,
And I'm gonna bring this up while we're talking about it. Talking about it. This is like, so I was having a fight with someone who said,
there we go.
they seized black powder from his property when they arrested him and go. I was like, no, they didn't. I thought I was going crazy.
No.
But
And they said, yeah, the defense said that the experts that they used said that this was not essentially it was inert, right? So it was not a dangerous contraption or item.
well,
Again,
hold on. This is
littering.
breaking. This is breaking. Say what you just said again.
Defense counsel, when they were going back and forth, said that the experts that the defense is using, and again, take it with a grain of salt, because it's going to be vying, they're going to be zealously advocating for the position of the defendant, Brian Cole Jr., said that the contraption, what most people know as the pipe bomb, was not even in a position to be a threat to anyone because of the composition of it and what was in it. It didn't have the necessary elements to be a threat.
Okay, that's interesting. May I ask, based on what they said, that how did they know that, and what was the response?
That was it. It was just based on the experts.
Okay, and
So they didn't bring in any receipts or.
Okay, so this was an.
And again, I don't have the luxury. I only skimmed through the initial documents. So you have the luxury of reading everything. It sounds like I don't. I just know based on what I heard yesterday when I happened to come.
Well, why I'm picking up on this is because Kash Patel and Pam Bondi were quite vocal about how these were real bombs, could have gone off and could have killed hundreds of people. They said viable and dangerous.
Yeah, and who told Cash, Dan, Pam, and Todd Blanche that they were viable? The lead prosecutor, maybe.
Well, and what's even more problematic is we were told at the time that they weren't, like back in Jan 2021. My understanding is everyone was saying they were not viable. They were not, and this was why they were floating the idea of a practice run or a drill with intelligence. What was the prosecution's response to that? Because they had to have rebutted that and said no, they were in fact active.
I mean, you're asking me to memorize the whole exchange. No, unfortunately.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But so the defense said, but there wasn't like an outburst in the court where they said, no, that's not true. How dare you say that? They were extremely dangerous and could have killed hundreds of people.
Well, generally, yeah, actually, the response was that it was essentially, they assumed that it was, right, the government. And so if it was a viable device, then having it placed underneath that bench at the DNC could have, because that's what the judge asked, how much, if it was a viable type of pipe bomb, could it have caused? And the government said that it could have, effectively injured or more at the bench if someone's sitting there, and then behind the Capitol Hill Club, if somebody was there at the time that it detonated, could have also caused damage to the one or two individuals in its vicinity.
I know this is going to be a joke because the judge would not have asked this, but did the judge ask why didn't you put all of DC on lockdown, and how did you only know that there were only 2 active pipe bombs? Then you found both of them within 25 minutes and knew that there was no further risk. Did anybody ask that question?
Well, they did not. And notably, what I noticed is that the arguments that were made about, should we release or continue to detain Brian Cole Jr., they effectively didn't use as an analogy the 4 years of pretrial confinement of individuals that were there on January 6th, the following day. And there wasn't really that much of a nexus in the conversation on both sides, how January 5th was related to January 6th, the pipe bombs to January 6th. And I found that pretty odd. And again, going back to defense counsel mentioned on 2 or 3 occasions, I think it was, that this was not a case of conspiracy. Going back to, like, why would they even raise that?
I
if
want
it
to.
wasn't even alleged by
No,
the government?
there's a few things
It's
that don't.
it's it's fishy to me.
Well, now that you mentioned that the defense said they weren't viable, so I was just digging in this morning after having that, after feeling like I was going crazy with the guy who said, oh no, they seized the black powder from his place. I'm like, I didn't read that anywhere, and lo and behold, they did not find any black powder at Brian Cole's place. From what I understand, they argue in their brief for preliminary detention
Maybe it
that
was Hunter Biden's white powder.
yeah. Well, I'm told I saw Lord of War. You could snort black powder. Um, no, they said he threw it all out. He disposed of all that, threw it all out, didn't throw out receipts, and wiped his phone 943 times.
Yeah, they mentioned that a couple times in the court.
Well, I mean, because
940. Oh yeah, they introduced another phrase for him I hadn't heard of before, that not only is he autistic, but he's got OCD.
yeah, well, no, but autistic, it's those typically go pretty close hand
So
in
I'll have
hand.
to do my own due diligence and research what exactly the range of autism is.
Well, yeah,
Right?
the range of autism is the confidence of the stride with which they walk, and I understand from what you reported, everyone said there's no way that that's the same guy. But this is the one that blew my mind. Where so after the
Oh.
black powder was not found, like they found receipts for everything except for the potassium nitrate, and they didn't find the black powder because they threw it out. You wouldn't know this particular detail. The way I found it curious is, um, they said, oh, here he had a receipt for sulfur. This was in their preliminary motion, or their motion for preliminary detention, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, they didn't have sulfur, a receipt for sulfur mentioned in the affidavit for probable cause, whatever you want to call it, which is what I noted at the time. It's like they don't have a receipt for the potassium nitrate or the sulfur, but now they discreetly or added it to their brief. And I was like, oh, that's weird. So I don't know when they discovered that, but this was the image that's in the brief. I was like, oh, what is that? I can't really tell what that is. And so I did a little Google reverse image search, and it turns out that it's actually Lily Miller, which they identified the brand, sulfur dust, which is an actual herbicide miticide. And it's 90% sulfur. And so one of the questions I had in my 5 questions, which I would love to ask Cash Patel, but they don't seem to want to answer questions from the likes of me. They prefer to reply to the trolls of Kyle Seraphin. Bada bing, bada boom. I said,
Mhm.
it wasn't in the initial affidavit. When did they discover this? And can you even make functional black powder out of 90% sulfur, 10% inert? People on the internet say you can. It's going to compromise its potency, whatever. But it was as though they just quietly added this new receipt for the sulfur. But Ivan, I almost forgot the most important part. It was from January 2018, 3 years before. So someone said, "Why would he
Oh
be gone?"
wait, this is new. So this guy is an oracle 3 years in advance. So his motive is that he was mad at the results of the 2020 election and the political issues that were prominent due to COVID and the summer of love burning down the country. 2 years prior, 2.5 years prior to its occurrence. Man,
No, but that he
this
bought
guy is
this.
an autistic genius.
No, he bought the sulfur 3 years before, about a year and more before buying the pipes, and they
Yeah.
they still don't have the potassium nitrate that he allegedly bought at Home Depot. And the thing, someone did say, why would he be buying herbicide miticide in winter? I I think you can have mites or insects in winter, but I don't know, and I don't know what winters are like in his area. How bad are the winters? You don't grow stuff in winter in Virginia where he's from.
No, I mean, right now it's in the 20s. So
Okay,
it's pretty chilly.
20s is Fahrenheit or Celsius?
In Celsius, that would be -5 degrees.
So it's
-5 to 10 degrees.
okay, fine.
It's pretty
Um,
chilly.
so that is pretty chilly. And but the bottom line, so they added that allegation. They added the receipt. We haven't seen the receipt or how he bought it, but sulfur, which is actually just a herbicide miticide, in 2018, and still no evidence or receipt for the potassium nitrate, and still no no charcoal, and he didn't have any of that when they finally arrested him. They didn't seize the car. They didn't seize firearms. None of this makes any sense. What did the judge look like? Did he look like he was swallowing any of this?
My interpretation of the judge is that he wants to, one, make this go into such a state of like delay it as long as possible and have him released on his own recognizance so that whatever happens happens.
Well,
And
that'll
then
be
on the
the
government side, they're just not. their arguments aren't plausible, and the government attorney, Jocelyn Ballantyne, just has no credibility.
I love it. The chat. They are smarter than me. That's when you catch the sales. And someone else said, "Yeah, you use miticide. You use it indoors for plants during the winter." Okay, so I think that's a very good thorough synopsis. Was there anything else that was out of the ordinary, and what did you do afterwards? Like, you go there, I was going to say chase down as a joke, but then someone might take it literally. You try to get some answers out of Jocelyn Ballantyne. She doesn't answer you. She's still on the file. Janine Pirro's nowhere to be seen.
Nowhere to be seen. I mean, so after the hearing, I step out, wait she was the last one out of the courtroom, Jocelyn Ballantyne, with her co-counsel, and then she steps out, and then we determine which side of the courthouse she departs. I go outside the courthouse. We immediately turn on the light producers, known as video cameras, and then we proceed to record a few questions. And at the beginning of it, I said, "Miss Ballantyne," and she looks back. I put my hand out and said, "Ivan Rakelin," and she
She says, "I
responds
know
with,
you.
"I know you.
Ivan,
Oh,
I
how
know
is that?
you."
How's that possible? Oh, you attended some of the trials that I was a part of. Oh, yeah, which ones? Interesting." It's true, but it's good to confirm that she knows exactly who I
Oh
am.
no, she said it like, "You, I know you." Like, it was like, "You know that I know you." It was almost like a lecturing tone.
And then after the second question, she said, "Have a nice day, Mr. Rakelin." And that was her indication that she was not going to continue to engage. And I was just going to make sure that she knew some of the questions that I think most of us have for her. I get it. I could have asked many more questions. I could have crossed the street with her. And I mean, the decision that I make is I think I made my point, and I want to do it in a professional, legal, moral, ethical way so that anybody watching it can clearly see that I'm not trying to intimidate her physically. I'm not trying to give any indication that I'm a physical threat. It's just I'm trying to expose that nothing makes sense, and we demand transparency. And transparency comes with constant interaction with those that are the most critical of you, and that are the most in good faith critical of the proceedings. And I hope I did that in that fashion.
No, you're good. It was good because, especially not to play stereotypes, but a woman will very quickly and disingenuously suggest that she was intimidated by it if it's a man like you, uh, you know, harassing them on the street, and they can very easily play that card, and we've seen people play it very often. I think I'm
Right,
about
and
the
you can
same.
tell my tone is very different than when I'm interacting with a woman, and especially if your stature and size is much smaller. I'm going to be very professional and courteous. But if you're going to flex on me, especially if you're larger than me physically in stature as a male, then all bets are going to be off, particularly if you touch me.